morning, everybody. Happy Monday, and welcome to the Charles Freedman radio program on Santa Cruz Voice. News talk from 9 to noon, that's what it's about every weekday here. And you need the telephone number so you can be part of the program. Happy to share it with you. 831-265-5050. 831-265-5050. Remember, make the call and you can raise any issue you care to raise. I'd love to hear from you, and whatever you want to contribute to the program, that is what we will hear from you. So take advantage of it. Give me a buzz, 831-265-5050. Settle back then, pour that second cup of coffee, and get ready for News Talk with your good friend, Charles Freedman, who is here with you, as always, on these Mondays. I've got a couple of chuckles for you, and then something that I think, well, it's new news to me. Maybe it will be to you also. First of all, you can often, more than you would think, letters to the editor of the San Francisco Chronicle reveal such a depth of ignorance and an utterly unwillingness to do any deep thinking about anything. Let me give you just a couple of examples here. Okay. This is in, Sunday's paper? Yeah, Sunday's paper. There are 3 letters here. 2 of them are uproarious. Okay, the first one, the headline, Oakland residents waiting for action from Mayor Lee. And Robert Townsend of Oakland. Robert Townsend, wasn't that black comedian who did the Hollywood Shuffle? Robert Townsend? He's fantastic. That's one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. This can't be the same Robert Townsend. He would never be this foolish. Okay. Anyway, Robert Townsend of Oakland laments that both San Francisco and Oakland recently got new mayors. Okay, so far so good. He points out that in San Francisco, things have been moving since, San Francisco Mayor Daniel Lurie has demonstrated urgency and measurable results in his first months. Crime is down. Homeless encampments are being cleared. He pushed through a package of sweeping building code reforms. But in Oakland, the new mayor, Barbara Lee, has been doing nothing, and he's confused by this. Robert, this was utterly predictable. Think of the circumstances by which each of these mayors came to office. In San Francisco, you had an incumbent leftist loon mayor who was incapably and ineffectively confronting the city's various problems. San Franciscans grew more and more frustrated with this, and Daniel Lurie came along to challenge and say, elect me, we'll do something different. We'll move this city back in a more rational direction. So Mr. Lurie ran against and defeated this leftist mayor and has been implementing new and different policies. Okay, that's the way American politics is supposed to work. So why is Oakland so different? Well, once again, Oakland had a leftist lunatic mayor, and they grew even more upset. They decided, we've got to recall this mayor. So they got the petitions out, and they set up a recall election, and the leftist lunatic mayor of Oakland was recalled by like a 60-40 vote. It wasn't even close. Just gone. Now the problem is, who's going to be the new mayor? Well, the way this was set up, a special election was called for. New mayor to be elected by the people. And here's where the problem comes in. The people of Oakland, now, don't ask me to explain this, because I cannot. But the people of Oakland, who had just gotten through recalling a mayor, elected as her replacement a strong supporter of that same mayor. Someone, in this case, Barbara Lee is the new mayor. She had been a strong opponent, a very, very outspoken. She certainly didn't hide this. She wasn't trying to pretend she was something she wasn't. Nothing like that. No. Came right out there and told everybody, no, don't vote for this recall. This is a terrible idea. Now, occasionally I have made reference on this program to turning from Tweedledum to Tweedledummer, but in Oakland, they really did. This is exactly what happened. And so, Mr. Robert Townsend of Oakland, this is the explanation. San Francisco voted to go in a different direction, voted to elect a mayor who actually had different approaches to the problems confronting the city. Oakland, on the other hand, elected a carbon copy of their previous mayor. And now here you are saying, well, why aren't things changing? Why is this new mayor not doing anything different? The answer, Mr. Townsend, is because she doesn't want to. She doesn't believe in it. She is doubling down on the same leftist policies that got her predecessor recalled. Now, you might ask, well, Charles, are you blaming Mayor Lee? No, I'm not. I have respect for Mayor Lee. At least she has the courage of her conviction. She's never pretended to be anything she isn't. In this particular case, the idiot award goes to the electors, the voters of Oakland. And about the only thing I can say that makes sense here, and again, this does not absolve these appalling voters. Most of them, the vast majority of them, didn't show up at the polls at all. A mayor is recalled, a special election is held, and most Oaklanders, I couldn't care less. So, Mr. Townsend, if you want to know who is responsible for the continuing mess in your town, go out in the street and look around at your fellow citizens. But don't write a letter to the Chronicle asking, what's wrong? What happened? I don't understand. If you don't understand this, and I've just explained it, and it's not rocket science. It's not an attractive story. It's not something that I enjoy talking about. It's not something that I can point to and, hey, isn't this great? No. It inhales. But it's certainly not difficult to understand. It's a very logical sequence of events, each one leading to the next and landing you right where you are. So please, Mr. Townsend, don't be confused by this, or you will reveal yourself as too foolish to be counted upon to cast an intelligent vote. And yes, I can't help but wonder if you're one of the people who voted for Barbara Lee to be mayor. Okay, one down, one to go. You say, you mean in just one day's letters to the editor, the San Francisco Chronicle can publish something else equally ludicrous? Hey, these people are good. They know how to be dumb. Okay, the next one, this is from Chris Witzel of Palo Alto. And Mr. Witzel has something else entirely in mind. He wants to write about the current battle royal that's going on over gerrymandering of congressional districts. Regarding outlaw gerrymandering. Gerrymandering was outlawed. This is news. When did that happen? By the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It prohibited states with a history of voter suppression from changing voting laws without Department of Justice approval, called pre-clearance. But in 2013, the Supreme Court ruled that no pre-clearance was necessary. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg dissented, writing, throwing out pre-clearance. Well, pre-clearance was simply a method by which states which could, let me see, how do I word this? In the mid-60s, states were as loath to comply with the Voting Rights Act, as they had been in the 50s to comply with the Brown versus Board of Education decision. This was, in my youth, the years of my youth, when the Civil Rights Revolution was being fought. And a mirror was being held up to the face of America. Is this really who you are? Do you take 12% of your population who have served alongside you in 2 world wars and treat them like garbage? This had been going on far too long. And so when the Voting Rights Act came in, recalcitrant Southern legislatures and Southern redistrictors figured, well, we'll cut our districts in such a way as to negate the black vote. To deny that this went on is foolish. Again, this is not something I'm happy about, but it was real. So the federal government said, well, in order, if you're going to redo your districts, you've got to come to us. This actually had impact far outside the South, right here in Watsonville. We had a massive problem with corruption in the city. Big scandal broke in the 50s. The city rewrote its charter, and instead of having our council members elected by districts, we went to an at-large system. And it worked. And Watsonville had much cleaner government, much better government, much better class of people getting involved, less parochial, less, it's all about my ward and to hell with the rest of the city. But then the federal government came in and said, the impact of this, the intent of this, is to make sure that no one of Hispanic descent ever serves on the city council. Ridiculous. In a city that was becoming more and more majority Hispanic, the question of when would Hispanics sit on and be a majority of the city council was, well, if not this year, then next. Just a matter of people becoming enough connected in the community, having enough friends and relatives to vote, and that's city council elections. That's how it often works. Your tribe. Anyway, the Justice Department came in and made Watsonville go back to a district system. And needless to say, the quality of government in Watsonville since that time has steadily deteriorated. Today, Watsonville is, what's the latest thing they did that is really big? Well, they took George Washington's bust out of the plaza. I wonder if they gave it back to the people who donated it. After all, they spent a considerable amount of money on the idea that this was their gift to the city for offering them, as immigrants, a place where they could grow. Well, I'm getting far afield from this. Okay, so the topic of Mr. Witzel's letter is gerrymandering, and he claims that gerrymandering was outlawed by the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That is ludicrous. And as a matter of fact, the San Francisco Chronicle acknowledged that. I shared, was it last Thursday or Friday, a piece in the Chronicle from their chief political reporter, Mr. Garofoli, in which he talks about the grand master of all gerrymanders, the one perpetrated by Philip Burton and the Democrats, that essentially denied Republicans God knows how many House seats out of California back in the 1980s, 1970s. These were absolutely amazing gerrymanders. Mr. Witzel claims that they never happened, claims that gerrymandering was illegal during that time period. Obviously, he is woefully ignorant. He seems to think that this pre-clearance device somehow eliminates gerrymandering, but the two existed side by side, incontrovertibly. So once again, a writer to the San Francisco Chronicle, and whose letter sufficiently impresses the editor that the newspaper prints it is a woeful demonstration of ignorance. I don't know. One of the things that, the First Amendment to the Constitution specifies freedom of the press, and the reason the framers put it in there is because they understood that in order for people to govern themselves, people had to have information. You can't act in ignorance. You got to know what's going on before you can formulate intelligent, effective policies that are going to accomplish the things you want to accomplish. Good information is necessary in a representative democracy. But good heavens, when I look at what passes now for information, this is not informed opinion. These letters to the editor are written by people who obviously can't think beyond the end of their noses, in the case of one, and are woefully ignorant of factual history, as in the other. How can you get, again, I go back to that little slogan from the world of computers, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. When you have uninformed, illogical people casting votes and drawing up policies, you're going to get a mess. And that, I think, is the biggest single explanation for the decline in public policy in this country over an extended period. Can be condensed into just a few words. You never did know nothing and always will. Okay, having disposed of those rather dubious targets, let's move on to something else before the bottom of the hour. There is a poll out on the California governor's race, and I'm really glad that this happened. The poll was conducted at the beginning of this month, August 4th to August 5th. Today, incidentally, is the 11th, so these numbers are just about a week old now. So that's pretty current. Poll was conducted by Emerson, a reputable polling organization. And they included, of course, aspirants from both Republican and Democratic sides, because on the California primary ballot, they all compete together, and therefore a poll to reflect the electoral reality must include them all. And I'm surprised at the results in a way. I had feared that with, 5 Republicans running for governor and a number of, what shall we say, prominent Democrats running for governor, we would wind up in a situation where Democrats would be placing first, second, possibly even third in this, and Republicans would simply be not in the competition at all. That is not happening according to what we see here. As a matter of fact, Democrats seem to have rallied to a considerable amount behind former Congresswoman Katie Porter. Now, Ms. Porter is a Democrat from Orange County. I know that sounds kind of oxymoronic, but I would remind you that one of the things Mr. Trump has accomplished is, he's turned a lot of blue counties red. Well, he's turned some red counties blue. Orange County is now Democratic. And that's a trend that had been going on for some time, but Mr. Trump really, really accelerated it. Republican voters in Orange County, many of them have just not been attracted to Mr. Trump at all and have moved in the other direction. As a result of this, in the first off-year election of Mr. Trump's administration, 2018, remember 2016, Trump was elected. Republicans had a fairly substantial majority in the House of Representatives. 2 years later, Republicans lost 40 seats in the House. 4 of them were from Orange County. That's right, Orange County in 2016. There are 4 districts in Orange County. It's a lot of people there. All 4 were held by Republicans. And 2 years into Mr. Trump's presidency, all 4 districts threw out their Republican incumbents and elected Democrats. So, again, if you're a big fan of President Trump and you don't like this, okay, you don't have to like it. Frankly, I don't like it either, but it's a fact. Now, 2 years later, 2 of those 4 districts came back. Katie Porter was one of the ones who got reelected. Then she made a try for U.S. Senate. Didn't get past the primary, but she is back now. She's running for governor, and she is first place with 18%. Asking, how can 18%? That's a tiny little number. How can that be first place? Well, once again, you've got a dozen people here running for governor. It is very easy to imagine when you have the vote split that many directions that 18% is enough for first place. Okay, so who's in second place? Wonder of wonders, a Republican. Steve Hilton, former British subject, former Fox News commentator, is at 12%. Between Ms. Porter and Mr. Hilton, those are the only 2 who are in double digits. Porter at 18, Hilton at 12. After that, everybody goes down and down. In third place is Riverside Sheriff Chad Bianco, another Republican, with 7%. So, let me see. Hilton, 12. Bianco, 7. 12 and 7 is 19. So, if you combine the 2 of them, if those votes were added together, they would have 19%. They'd be a point ahead of Katie Porter, and they'd be in first place, or whichever one of them. But obviously, it's not the way it is. They are dividing the vote. And so, Ms. Porter is number 1 at 18%, Steve Hilton second at 12%, Chad Bianco third at 7%, and after that, you start getting your Democrats. Antonio Villaraigosa, former mayor of Los Angeles, 5%. Rick Caruso, former candidate for mayor of Los Angeles, 4%. Xavier Becerra, let me see, wasn't he Attorney General or something? He became a member of Mr. Biden's administration. Now he's back here running for governor, 3%. Eleni Kounalakis, lieutenant governor of the state of California, 3%. Somebody named Klubeck, a Democrat. I understand this person is a billionaire. They have nothing else going for them that I know of, 2%. Betty Yee, I believe she is at present the controller of the state of California. She is currently a statewide office holder, 2%. Tony Atkins, former President Pro Tem of the California Senate, as I recall, so person of considerable experience, 2%. Now, there are several other people. They don't go that far down, do they? Let's find out. No, they don't. That's as far as they go. So there are like 3 other Republicans. Somebody named Mercury, somebody named On, one other. These people are gadfly candidates. They're nuisance candidates. It kind of reminds me, do you remember back when Governor Schwarzenegger was first elected, we had a recall election, and then we had this ballot. There were like 100 people running for governor. I mean, Gary Coleman was running for governor, all kinds of celebrities. And some people just, hey, I think I'll run for governor. Well, these other 3 Republicans running for governor fit into that. Oh, we've got a phone call, and it's past. Let me go ahead and take the phone call first. Then I'll do my ads, and we'll find out what Greg has to say on this lovely Monday. Good morning, sir. Thank you for your call.
Oh, good morning, Charles. Just a brief statement regarding the representatives in L.A. said during Trump's they disappeared as Republicans. I think that had a lot to do with the media and the lawfare that was going on and influencing, and the Russia thing. Nobody wanted to get on board with Republicans. They thought he was a corrupt person, which he is not.
Well,
that's all I have to say about that.
Just a second, though. That deserves a little comment. We went into the 2018 election with 245 members of the House. We came out with, I think it was like 202 or something like that. So we lost control of the House. We lost a significant number. But the point I'm making is that far more of our incumbent Republicans were reelected than weren't. And the areas where they weren't tended to be suburban districts where Republicans had long run very strongly. So this is part of the electoral mathematics that's going on now. People point to areas where, like the Rio Grande Valley, for example, where Republicans had never even been competitive, and suddenly they are, and they're winning a lot of votes. But on the other side, there are areas where Republicans had traditionally been quite strong, for the Atlanta suburbs, for example, where suddenly Republicans are struggling and in many cases losing. Orange County is reflective of that. So, this is just, the ebb and flow of politics.
Yeah. Well, when I was going to school down in Southern California in the 80s, Burbank was solid red.
That's right.
And so was Orange County, and they flipped, and they'll flip back too, because everybody is sick of what's happening to our cities, and this is my reason why I called. I commend President Trump for using the federal government to take control of Washington, D.C. and clean it up and make it an example of all the other cities in the United States. He's going to clean it up. They're going to get rid of crime. They're going to get rid of the homeless. They're going to get rid of open drug use. They're going to re-beautify that city. And I applaud him for that. And I hope other cities take note, because he mentioned Chicago, L.A., San Francisco. I wouldn't be opposed to him getting in there and helping clean up crime in these cities that is rampant, and getting prosecutions for people who are committing these crimes. So Washington, D.C. is well set up for it now with a judge like Janine Pirro in there. She's going to make sure that things are prosecuted properly, not a revolving door. So I commend President Trump for taking this action and cleaning up Washington, D.C. It's a good thing.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. You kind of stole my one of the things I was going to talk about later in the program, but that's okay. I'm perfectly glad to have you bring it up now. Mr. Trump put out a statement on Truth Social. This is how it reads. We're going to have a news conference tomorrow in the White House. I guess that would be today. I'm going to make our capital safer and more beautiful than it ever was before. The homeless have to move out immediately. We will give you places to stay, but far from the capital. The criminals, you don't have to move out. We're going to put you in jail where you belong. It's all going to happen very fast, just like the border. We went from millions pouring into zero in the last few months. This will be easier. Be prepared. There'll be no Mr. Nice Guy. We want our capital back. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I believe it was back in the 1970s when a proposal came along for home rule for the District of Columbia. Now, the District of Columbia, this is Washington, D.C., this has been federal territory, and from the beginning of our republic, it was administered by the federal government, by Congress. And the proposal came along and said, well, this is unfair, and it's really a racist thing because the population of the District of Columbia at that time was very heavily African American. Today, it remains that way. But the idea that in order to be part of the civil rights movement, we have to give home rule. In other words, the people of the district get to rule themselves. And at that point, they elected a city council and a mayor. And D.C. started becoming less and less well run. At one point, we even had a mayor of the District of Columbia, Marion Barry, who was caught on videotape smoking crack, and in general, being an embarrassment not just to himself but to the district. Unfortunately, in the aftermath of that, Mr. Barry was not summarily dismissed by the voters of Washington, D.C. Maybe the voters of Washington are kind of like the voters of Oakland that I was criticizing earlier. They keep electing the same kind of people and expecting an improvement. So Mr. Trump has taken the decision. I don't care what's politically correct. I don't care what they say about me. Washington, D.C., much of it has become a cesspool of crime, poverty, indigence, whatever you don't like. And he said, I'm going to do something about it. This is federal territory. I'm the president of the damn United States, and I'm going to do something about it. Frankly, I don't want the capital city of my country looking like Southside Chicago or looking like East Los Angeles. I want the capital city of my country a place where people from all over the world come to wonder at the beauty of the public buildings and things. I want them to see a beautiful city. And Mr. Trump, I'm very happy with this. Definitely move the bums out of Washington, D.C., and he says, we're going to do something for you, but you're not going to be lounging on the sidewalks of our capital. Insofar as the criminals are concerned, criminals should be apprehended and tried and given the appropriate punishments. So really, it's hard to see how anybody could be against this, but I'm sure there are people who will be.
Of course there will be. Another thing I like is that he's given the police more power. They don't have to sit there with their hands tied. If somebody spits in a cop's face, like many of them do, they were told not to do anything. And now they're going to need to see somebody like me after if they spit in a cop's face, because they're going to need some replacement parts. I think that's good. I think it's good. I think it's good because we can't allow our nation's capital to decay any more than it has, and to be such an unsafe place. And I watched the press conference this morning.
Oh, did you?
All the way. Oh, yeah. I watched him speak, and I watched some of his cabinet members speak about it.
Uh-huh.
And Janine Pirro herself, the U.S. District Attorney there, she says her hands have been tied because of the laws with most of these crimes, carjackings and beating up seniors and, robbing them in the streets and on public transportation are juveniles. They're 14, 15, 16, and her hands have been tied with the laws. But I hope they get a handle on that, because, I was 14 once. I was a mischievous boy. And I always feared getting caught, the consequences of what would happen. And there were consequences where I lived.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They don't fear that in Washington, D.C. It's a revolving door. They beat up a person, they shoot somebody in the chest, and the judge gives them probation and says, go to college. What the hell? Yeah,
Yeah.
he's really college-worthy person,
Oh
but
my
that's what
God.
they do.
Or
So
what would
I
Joe
commend
Biden?
the
Joe
president.
Biden would tell him to learn to code.
No more tearing down or defaming our property, our taxpayers paid property in Washington, D.C. You try to tear down a statue or defame it or a building, it's 10 years now. It is 10 years. No probation, nothing. You sit in jail for 10 years. That's good. That's a deterrent. It needs to be enforced.
It has one other effect too. People sometimes people get the idea. Well, if you lock up a criminal, maybe you'll reform them, or maybe you'll deter somebody else. Maybe you will. That's a possibility. But I like certainty. If you have somebody locked up, it is a certainty, an absolute 100% certainty that they are not out victimizing somebody today. So you can
True.
actually get a real, not a possible benefit, not a hoped for benefit. When you take criminals and lock them up and isolate them from the rest of us and protect us from them, they are out of our hair. They're out of our neighborhoods. They're out of our pockets, out of our cars, out of our consciousness. And this is part of what we pay taxes for. We pay
Not only
taxes,
that,
public
Carl,
safety.
10 years to reflect on your crime can change a person's life. If there's no consequence,
Well,
you
again,
commit a crime.
it can, but that's
can.
that's not a certainty. When they're locked
No,
up, they're not hitting me over the head. That's a certainty.
but here's another certainty. If you let them out every time they do it, that there will be never any change. So if you lock them up and you get 50% of them to stop, that's 50% less committing the crimes. And I know it costs money to keep them in, but in Greg Ocampo's world, they would be working their tails off.
Well, bear in mind, you've got to compare. It's comparative cost. You're not an economist. You're a dentist. Well, in economics, you've got to figure. You weigh costs. It is expensive to incarcerate a criminal. I understand that. You're absolutely right. Think of the cost of having him not incarcerated. Now, the problem, of course, is that this is a cost that is focused rather than diffuse. After all, if it's your neighbor who gets their house burglarized and gets their head split open, then you can say, well, I didn't lose anything, only my neighbor did. But is that something that you feel comfortable with? And what about if the next time it's you? No, there are costs of keeping people incarcerated, and the costs of not having them incarcerated have to be taken into account also. It is expensive to have criminals roaming our streets.
Yes, and it would be profitable having them in jail if it was up to me, because I would make them work. They wouldn't be building their bodies and watching Jerry Springer on TV, see if they're the ones that knocked off the girl. Anyway, can I just say one other thing?
Sure.
Another topic. And it's to commend President Trump again, because these two things I really think are great. And that is using the U.S. military after designation of cartels as armed terrorist organizations to perform sorties in Mexico and South America, wherever their intelligence brings them, to destroy the labs and the organization of the cartels that are at war with us. And I'm glad there's a designation there, because they are at war with us. They are killing our people at an alarming amount, smuggling their drugs in, corrupting and trafficking human beings. So, to me, I commend him. Use the U.S. military to destroy their fentanyl, cocaine, their submarines, everything should be on the table. And they should destroy them like they do the pirates of Somalia, to send an example. You come out here, we're going to annihilate you. You start producing drugs to sell to America, we're going to annihilate you, because it is a war. And you can't look at it any other way. It's a war.
I've been listening to you. The one thing I'm kind of worried about or concerned about, what are the capabilities? I mean, the idea of you annihilate these people who are at war with us, I'm sympathetic to that. The question is, to what degree is it practicable? And is it possible that this would be another military adventure that the United States would get into with no prospect for then getting out of? Mr. Trump has been very wary of such exercises, so I think he probably has that in mind too. But it's something to be concerned about.
I think that the intelligence that we're gathering with drones right now over Mexico and South America, and GPS marking these potential spots and then starting to pop them off one at a time, will send a clear message to the organizers, and hopefully it will kill the organizers of these groups, because they're killing so many Americans, 1,300 a week. 1,300 Americans a week. That's a lot of people. All across our country. Somebody just died right now because of fentanyl and the cartel. And some kid is being prostituted or forced to work because of the cartel in this country every second. So I commend our president for not putting his head in the sand, pulling it out and saying this is what needs to be done, and using the U.S. military to do it. Because, I'll say it again, they're at war with us. They're killing us. China is backing it. So,
well, I doubt
Trump.
if any of these expeditions are going to be carried out on Chinese soil. But you've talked about across the border in Mexico, where there's actual territory in Mexico where the cartels actually control the territory. The Mexican government doesn't. So there are targets there. There are targets there, and if these can be located, identified, and taken out in the accurate and effective way that you envision, I'm all for it.
I think it's already started.
We'll have to keep our eyes and ears open, because one thing I know is this is a story that the mainstream press would never report.
Exactly. Just like so many others that they omit, and they're part of the problem. Don't get me started on them. They are a big part of the problem.
Sound like Billy Crystal. Don't get me started.
That's the pepper.
Well, thank you for the call.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thank you. We'll do that definitely. Okay, that's Greg with a couple of things to share with us today, and I'm certainly glad he took the time. We are now past our time for our first ad package, so let's get that out of the way, and we'll be right back.
Hi, folks. Warren Knox here of Knox Roofing. I thought I'd share a few statistics with you. Do you know how long a frog can hold its breath? 4 minutes. Do you know how many nails the average roof requires? 7,000. What's the percentage of roofing companies that will be out of business after they've installed a roof? 80%. Here at Knox Roofing, we're still going strong, exceeding 15,000 homes now. Give us a call here at Knox Roofing at 461-0634. Thanks, folks.
I've got a question for you. Do you want a lower car payment just by making a phone call? You know, most people buy a car and they pay whatever the car dealer says their interest rate is, and they forget about it and make payments. But did you know there is a secret in your contract that allows another company to refinance any car payment to try and lower it? It's true. There is indeed a company out there that knows the ins and, more importantly, the outs on car loans, and they know how to lower your current car payments. It's easy and fast, and you could have a lower car payment next month. Make this free call right now and find out if you could lower your existing car payment. Call the Car Savings Hotline right now. The call is free.
Call now, 800-471-4435, 800-471-4435, 800-471-4435. That's 800-471-4435.
Attention content producers. You can have access to a complete digital media production facility at Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on SoCal Avenue. Easily rent video and audio equipment, a studio with green screen, editing suite, and audio booth, all at can't say no rates. Schedule a tour to see for yourself at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
At 9:52, we are back on News Talk with the Charles Freedman radio program. Thanks to Greg for raising this question about taking back the District of Columbia. In my view, this is long overdue. I was thinking that when Marion Barry was mayor of New York, or new mayor of Washington, D.C., and when he was found to be so utterly corrupt and such, literally burning a crack pipe and having himself photographed doing it, this was emblematic of the failed and criminal leadership that had risen to the top of politics in the nation's capital. It was a shameful story, terrible story. And I remember thinking then, oh, well, they're going to pull the plug on this. The federal government will pull the plug on this. They will take back control of the District of Columbia. And nobody ever did. Nobody ever did. And so I'm very glad that this is one of those things. Mr. Trump has shown himself time after time to be unafraid of doing things that people say, you can't do that. He says, oh, yes, I can. There are times when this leads him into counterproductive exercises. I understand that. It's not all positive. But there are also times when it means that he will undertake tasks that desperately need undertaking and that nobody else will touch. Bottom line, if he takes responsibility for the administration of the District of Columbia, and if improvement, this is what has to happen. Improvement has to show up. You have to have cleaner streets. You have to have safer streets. That seems to me like a fairly low bar. The district has deteriorated. Conditions in the district have deteriorated to a point where effective administration and simple enforcement of existing law will do a tremendous amount. Mr. Trump likens this to the border. That's not unreasonable. Remember, for quite some time we were saying that this will be the easiest promise of all for Mr. Trump to keep. All he has to do is enforce existing law. The fault lies with his predecessor, who did not enforce the law. I've got to admit, I'm confused as to why Mr. Trump isn't getting a larger bump in his popularity and approval from his prompt and effective handling of border and immigration crises. The border problem has been solved, confronted and solved very quickly. Just enforce the law, that's all. I don't think he gets enough credit. Maybe people don't give him enough credit because they figure, oh, that was too easy, too simple. All he had to do was enforce the law. Well, I guess that's true, but if that's the case, then why did his predecessor not do it for 4 years? Well, in the case of Mr. Biden, maybe he actually didn't understand what was going on, but he had a young, vigorous member of his administration whom he appointed to be his border czar, the person who would be in charge of all of the border enforcement efforts. Young, vigorous Vice President Kamala Harris, who's told us many times that the border was secure. She never actually went there and looked, but she told us it was secure. And then people wonder why she lost the election. To this day, I wonder how she got as many votes as she did. That's the thing that worries me. That's the thing that worries me. Kamala Harris got 48% of the popular vote. 48%. That's way too much. That's way too much. Better people. Walter Mondale got 41%. George McGovern was a better person, better politician, better official. He got 39%. So if you want to be scared about something, be scared about the fact that Kamala Harris got 48% of the vote. A couple of minutes left before we get to the top. I just want to reflect a little bit more on this California governor's poll that I was describing and talking about when we got along. It appears that of the Republicans who are running for governor, most of them are simply nuisance candidates who will get nowhere. The only two who seem to be showing any traction are Steve Hilton and Chad Bianco. Mr. Hilton has just about double the support that Mr. Bianco does. I am hoping that Mr. Hilton can manage to parlay this into a position in the final race. Do I think Steve Hilton can be elected governor? Not really. I think it would take somebody with more ability as a communicator and more experience in actually running something. Mr. Hilton has been an advisor to a conservative prime minister in Great Britain, and later a commentator on the Fox News network here in America. He has become, he's come to America, he's become an American citizen, he's eligible to vote, eligible to run. His fundraising capacity is, well, I don't know. I mean, obviously he's in the media, he's connected with people there. Some of them have significant amounts of money to donate. So conceivably, he could raise enough money to make a credible run for governor of California. I don't think Chad Bianco can do that. And fundraising is important. You don't have to have as much money as the other side, but you have to have enough to get your message out. The last two candidates for governor of California on the Republican side, people didn't even know who they were. Election day. Election day comes. Who are the candidates for governor? Well, there's Gavin Newsom and somebody running against him, I guess. I don't know who. That's not satisfactory. By election day, people at least need to know who you are and what you're running for. That's, once again, a very low bar. Mr. Hilton looks to me like the only one in the race right now who might have a chance to clear that bar. After that, well, the issues are there. The issues are there to cause a revolt among the electorate of the state of California. The question is, where's the person who can articulate these issues, gain the visibility, and do the job? Mr. Hilton looks closest to that at the moment. It is 10 o'clock at SantaCruzVoice.com. Be back in 6. Okay, let's see here. Okay. Oh, hey, there's a thought. Okay. Yeah. Hmm. I always get the hour wrong. 10:06. 10:06. Hour number 2 begins. Telephone number is 831-265-5050. Hey, I got that right. I'm Charles Freedman. It's my radio program on SantaCruzVoice.com. News talk from 9 to noon, as usual on these weekdays. Podcast listeners will no doubt be despondent. For the last 6 minutes, there was virtual radio silence. There's a reason for that. I came up with something that I wanted to play, but I felt that it was so important that I was going to go ahead and put it on the program so that everybody, and not just podcast listeners, would be able to hear it. This is a short 5-minute presentation, so it fits into the newscast, from Prager University. and it is on the topic of Howard Zinn and the malignant book, People's History of the United States of America, which has poisoned so many young people against their own country. Go ahead. Check this out.
The writer of the most popular and influential history book of the last quarter century was a radical leftist professor who despised his subject. The writer's name is Howard Zinn, and his subject is America. Zinn died in 2010, but his toxic theme lives on. America is and has always been a cesspool of racism, imperialism, and capitalist exploitation. You may never have heard of Zinn, but I assure you, a history teacher at your local high school or college has, and probably teaches his texts or ideas. The book Zinn wrote is entitled A People's History of the United States. If you're trying to understand why so many young people lack patriotism, or worse, regard America with contempt, you don't have to look much further than Zinn. Where did the idea that Columbus was evil come from? Lincoln wasn't really interested in freeing the slaves. The Allies weren't any better than the Nazis and the Japanese in World War II. The Vietnam War was not about stopping the spread of communism, but about promoting American imperialism. Zinn. How do you take an essentially decent country and turn it into the source of much of the world's evil? Well, you just have to lie, distort, and falsify. Zinn did all three. A lifelong and passionate leftist, everything he ever said or wrote was in service of the Marxist dogma that life is a class struggle. Distilled to its essence, this simply means that those who have power are bad and those who don't are good. Therefore, the downtrodden working class, the proletariat, are a heroic but faceless mass. The villains, the capitalist ruling class, in contrast, all have names and faces. They are the heroes of the nation: Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, Kennedy, and others. Zinn, as any Marxist true believer would, saw his task to tear down the latter and promote the former. But is such a simplistic approach really history? Noted liberal historian Arthur Schlesinger didn't think so. Zinn, Schlesinger wrote, was a polemicist, not a historian. As a polemicist, a propagandist, however, Zinn had few peers. Columbus turned out to be a perfect target. Before Zinn, Columbus was widely extolled for his foresight and bravery. Now, thanks to Zinn, he's considered a genocidal maniac. Zinn takes the explorer's ship logs and twists them to say the opposite of what Columbus clearly intended. In Zinn's distorted rendering, Columbus had contempt for the natives and wanted to enslave them. Read the explorer's observations in context and in full, and their true meaning emerges. Columbus had deep respect for the Taino and insisted that his men treat them well. Furthermore, he chronicled how terrified the Taino were of the neighboring tribe, the Caribs. For good reason. The Caribs not only enslaved the Taino, immediately and decisively refuting the idea that Europeans introduced slavery to the New World, but ate them. Yes, they were cannibals. Much excellent scholarship on Columbus had already been done before Zinn turned the explorer into evil incarnate. Not surprisingly, the picture painted by respected historians like Samuel Eliot Morison was complex. Columbus was not faultless, but neither was the world he discovered a new Eden. But if you're preoccupied with propaganda rather than truth, what does it matter? It didn't for Zinn. His monsters change, but never their motive: more power for the capitalist ruling elite. Nowhere is this view more clearly expressed than in his discourse, the longest section of the book on the Vietnam War. In Zinn's view, it was just this simple: mighty imperialist America bad, the North Vietnamese, the fearless peasants good. That the communist North Vietnamese slaughtered and tortured tens of thousands of South Vietnamese is not allowed to upset the equation. Again, Zinn abuses his sources to make his point. In one egregious example, he turns Foreign Service Officer Douglas Pike actually a passionate defender of the South Vietnamese into an admirer of the North Vietnamese. In fact, Pike believed what the North Vietnamese were doing to their cousins in the South amounted to genocide. I go into this and much more of Zinn's truth-bending in my book, Debunking Howard Zinn, Exposing the Fake History That Turned a Generation Against America. But this much should be clear. A people's history of the United States has no place on a high school or college history curriculum because it doesn't teach history. All it teaches is hatred for America. Our students deserve better. I'm Mary Graybar, resident fellow at the Alexander Hamilton Institute for Prager University.
Well, I made the point a number of times on the program, but she does it an awful lot better, so I wanted to share that with you because to this day, that mendacious text is still being used. This is why I say to those of you who are parents, if you have children in the schools, find out what textbooks they're being taught from. And if you find that Howard Zinn is among those texts, do something. If it's impractical for you to take your kids out of that school, that would be the obvious choice, is get them away from this. It's like, your child confronts a rattlesnake. What do? You get the child away from the rattlesnake. Very, very, very plain, very obvious. If that's not a possibility, then undertake education at home in the true nature of America. And there are places where you can get help in doing this, but for God's sake, do something. Because a young person, an impressionable young mind, subjected to this propagandized and utterly malignant view of our country, will turn that child into somebody who either certainly doesn't care about America. What the hell? Why should I care about this country? It does bad things for bad reasons. I should care? There's a logic in that, isn't there? If something is worthless, what are you going to put into defending it or helping it? Little or nothing, of course. And that's as it should be, isn't it? Unless, of course, the notion that the country is worthless happens to be built on a foundation of sand, happens to be utterly untrue, in which case that young person who is operating under that delusion has been victimized, lied to, misled, and hoodwinked into essentially negating and devaluing one of the most valuable things that any of us as Americans have: our heritage, our national heritage. Okay. Hey, I've got a phone call. Let's find out who it is here. Oh, Evan. Well, let's find out what's on his mind today. Good morning, Evan. How you doing? Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, Charles. Happy Monday to everybody else that's listening to. A great little clip there. I'm just kind of questioning a little bit. Now, if people just tuned in, there was a clip talking about Howard Zinn. Can I just get your thoughts on him one more time, sir? If people just started tuning in or whatnot, what's your impressions? Do you agree with his history, or do you not agree with his history?
I just played an excerpt by a very capable, qualified academic who takes Zinn apart bone by bone. Do you want me to repeat everything she said? Because if I do, I'm not going to do
No,
it.
because that'd be another 5 minutes.
If I do, Evan, I'm not going to do it as well because she was really, really spot on.
For sure. No, can I just touch base on one thing? Possibly Columbus, for example, and his Howard Zinn's thoughts on him.
Well, I'm waiting. Go ahead.
No, I'm wondering about your thoughts, sir, first.
Oh, okay. Well,
and what
in the presentation you just heard, historians have looked at Columbus as they have looked at many other historical figures and tried to understand as many of the facets of that person as possible. The idea that that person is lionized as an explorer, somebody, what do I want to say? Exceptional, who, when most people were afraid or uninterested in sailing to the west in the hope of, obviously he was trying to find a way to India. Everybody knows that. So Columbus' greatest accomplishment was based on a mistake, something that was not really possible. He had this idea that if you sailed west long enough, you'd run into China, India, and the Orient. Well, yeah, that's true. On the other hand, he had no idea that in between was an entire landmass consisting of North and South America and uninterrupted land from the upper reaches of Canada down to Tierra del Fuego. And so what he did, instead of accomplishing this new route to the Orient, he found an entirely undiscovered, brand new, essentially completed the map of the world. And this is a great accomplishment. And the idea that somehow this should be reduced to an act of criminality or viciousness, I think is utterly unfair. The idea that Columbus was searching for a way to find people to intimidate, enslave, and otherwise browbeat, no, that doesn't fit the facts. But that's what we're presented today. That's the reality that we're told about Columbus, and that is a big lie.
So when someone comes to you, like Howard Zinn, for example, and says this Columbus guy brutally murdered your indigenous people were here first.
That's not true. That's a lie. That is a lie.
But isn't it true to an extent, though? I find it kind of interesting. I'm just kind of questioning your thoughts, because I don't think it's a lie.
Well, maybe you should look more into what actually happened. Columbia made 4 landings in the New World. He didn't just make one voyage; he made 4. He did attempt, instructed his crew, do not mistreat the indigenous people here. These are human beings, respect them. He took back some so that he could introduce them to Queen Isabella and say, hey, look, these are the people from the place I went to. This was not a matter of an attack or something terrible. This was a matter of, hey, this is part of what's going on in this new land. Columbus did not come to enslave anybody. He was an explorer. And the attempt to somehow debase him into Simon Legree is, it's based on simple dishonesty. It is not an actual depiction of what Columbus did or how he thought.
No, I get you. He's an explorer, and but I just find it kind of interesting where we're just I don't know. I find our history is a bit whitewashed, in my opinion.
I find
And we seem to just kind of
the history that you're speaking of is
distort a lot of stuff.
The history that you're talking about is blackwashed. There is,
Oh, I'm sorry, blackwash. My bad. Yes, sir.
No, oh my God. It is difficult. There is so much, it's difficult to discuss these issues with somebody who just simply doesn't know what he's talking about. No offense. Because you haven't looked at...
Yeah, but I'm sorry. No, I apologize here, Mr. Charles. You talk about propaganda. I find a lot of our schools, can't you agree that our schools are now being propagandized?
Certainly.
And I feel like our
Certainly.
schools have already been propagandized since for like 40 plus years.
Well, if that's the case, then that propaganda sure as hell has changed, because when I went to school...
no, it has not, sir.
Really?
No, it has not.
Oh, really?
I'm 40 years old. Let me give you my experiences in school here, sir. I was in special ed. They barely teach your disabled kids, so that's not propagandized at all. Maybe it's just your teachers not teaching your kids right. But I find when you start going after history and saying, "Hey, look, these people might have been looking for new land, but they were also conquering land that wasn't theirs to begin with." And I find that when, you're a history teacher, and when I go to you or other history teachers and start discussing those facts, you tell me I'm a liar. And I think...
Okay, that's about enough of that. I didn't tell you were a liar. You no such language. You mentioned that you were in special ed, and you mentioned you're 40 years old. When I was a kid in school, of course, this would have been 60 years ago, the presentation of U.S. history, I had complaints with the presentation of U.S. history in my classroom because Arthur Schlesinger Jr. was one of the authors, and all he would tell me about Calvin Coolidge was he slept more than any other president, which in my mind was disinformation in the form of a half-truth. I remember it to this day because I was so outraged by it. As I look back on what we were taught about Columbus in those days, yes, we understood, we were taught that Columbus and other explorers came from Europe to the New World with the idea of colonization, with the idea of building new empires. They did it in different ways, but the idea that the whole well, there is so much to this, and that's why it attempts to simplify it. The model used in, say, North America, where the United States of America was born, that model was very different from the model used in Latin America, or even by the British themselves in the Caribbean. The British brought slaves to the Caribbean. Columbus, rather the Portuguese and Spanish, brought slaves to Latin America. The British brought some slaves to North America, but far fewer. And in order to study this thoroughly, you can't do it in 5 or 10 minutes on a radio program. But when you told me that you were studying with special ed, that tells me something, because you said yourself they probably didn't teach us very much. I've had not that much experience with special ed teaching. It's, I was more, mainstream teaching, regular kids. There are a number of reasons why kids get put into special ed. I believe to a great extent those kids are disadvantaged thereby. The assumption is made that they're not capable of much in the way of learning, so very little is presented to them. At least it seems that way to me, looking at it from my end of it. And I can see you as a victim of that. to say that the quality of historical instruction in the public schools hasn't changed, that you stated it was propaganda then, it's propaganda now, and it hasn't changed. Oh, yeah, it has. Oh, there.
I think it's gotten worse.
Oh, well, I agree. It has gotten worse. It's also changed direction very much. Howard Zinn, let me see, when did he write that piece of trash? Hang on a second. I want to get a date for when Howard Zinn actually wrote that book, because Howard Zinn, okay.
Zinn opens his book by rejecting the idea of noble adventure, saying Columbus' arrival in 1940. No, I'm sorry. I apologize.
1980.
I'm not sure. I thought I had it too.
Okay, 1980 was when he first published A People's History of the United States. In 2007, he published a version for a younger readers. That really, to my way of thinking, that's a criminal act. But then again, there's a First Amendment to the Constitution under which freedom of speech and freedom of the press. So, just because I don't like it doesn't make it something that is prosecutable. So back off, Charles. I graduated from university in 1979, so I was actually out of college before Mr. Zinn ever published his book. And this book tremendously changed the quality of and the practices of public education in this country. So when you say you think that things have gone downhill, well, there you're absolutely right. I agree with you completely.
Well, I just don't think it's just special ed. When you start teaching these younger kids, first, second, and third grade, how, I think I've stated this before on your show before. When you start teaching these young kids, and I don't think we need to start teaching some of this bad history, but we do need to kind of put in the history that isn't being taught, and because I find myself being questioned more, or questioning the narrative more. And I find these Howard Zinn people good to an extent. And I hear you, if they're kind of not putting the exact history out there, I get you. But I find conquerors again, like Columbus. He may have been a person looking for things, but God, they were going after territory anyway, I find. And I don't know. Well, we'll kind of go ahead and agree to disagree to an extent, but I agree probably with you more than anything, sir. So I thank you so much for the talk, and hopefully you'll get some other callers today. And again, happy Monday, sir.
Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Let me see here. Yeah, it's 10:30. Let me assemble my thoughts. I'll be back in 2 minutes.
The 25th Annual Scotts Valley Art, Wine, and Beer Festival, August 16th and 17th at Sky Park in Scotts Valley. 2 days of fun for the whole family with food, fine art, a kids' fun zone, and live music, including the Joint Chiefs and the Lost Boys featuring James Durbin. Join us Saturday for the Cops and Rodders Car Show with over 100 vintage cars on display. And don't miss Dog Day Sunday with contests for all canines. All this and free admission to the Scotts Valley Art, Wine, and Beer Festival. See you there.
Get hooked up with affordable cannabis at the locally owned Hook Outlet. The Hook is a friendly neighborhood outlet where everybody above the age of 21 can have access to the best cannabis products for the best prices in the county. Get friendly local service and great prices in person and online at the Hook Outlets in Capitola and Watsonville. Order online at hookoutlet.com and pick up 9 to 9, 7 days a week. Get hooked up at the locally owned Hook Outlet.
Attention investors. This is a simple commercial on the investment value of gold. Gold continues to make new highs. In good markets and in bad markets, you need to have your portfolio balanced with gold. Learn about owning physical gold or getting a gold-backed IRA. Make this simple call right now.
800-414-1657. 800-414-1657. That's 800-414-1657.
Sponsored by Reagan Gold. We're offering a 100% risk-free gold guide. Gold continues to make new highs. And unlike stocks, gold has never been worth zero. You owe it to your nest egg and future to own some physical gold or set up a gold-backed IRA. Call right now for your free report.
800-414-1657. 800-414-1657. That's 800-414-1657.
Sponsored by Reagan Gold.
Okay, 10:32 is the time. I'm Charles Freedman. As I was listening to the presentation from PragerU I gave on Howard Zinn, I found myself wondering, why are you spending all of this time dwelling on Columbus? I guess that's one of the obviously it's a big name in the march of Western civilization, but the mendacity of Howard Zinn goes into so many other things and is so pervasive. I mean, the idea that Lincoln didn't care about freeing the slaves. I guess if you read that statement of his and said, if I felt I could preserve the Union by freeing the slaves, I would do so. If I felt I could preserve the Union by leaving them alone, I would do so. If I felt that I could preserve the Union by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do that. He was attempting to make a point there about the prosecution of the war effort. But if you look at Lincoln's writings and his presentations over a period long predating his election to the presidency, his loathing for slavery was evident and deep-seated. As a man of abiding Christian faith, the idea that people would treat others as chattel property was one that Lincoln found utterly unacceptable and offensive. But at the same time, he recognized that as head of a constitutional republic, his opinions were not the law. At the end of the war, one of Lincoln's last acts was to make sure that the 13th Amendment, the Constitution of the United States, was passed and ratified. This was the final solution insofar as slavery was concerned. It outlawed it today, tomorrow, and forever. That was Lincoln's gift, his parting gift to the American people, to indicate that such a man really didn't care about the abolition of slavery. This is emblematic of the mendacity of Howard Zinn. Take the great men, the achievers, the heroes, and debunk and disgrace them. It is a fact right now that if you ask the average school child, what can you tell me about George Washington? The first thing that's going to come to their mind is, oh, he owned slaves. Well, yes, he did, as a matter of fact. But is that the most important thing about George Washington? As a matter of fact, I would say that that is possibly the most pedestrian and unremarkable thing about George Washington. Washington was a Virginia aristocrat of the 18th century. Virginia aristocrats of the 18th century owned slaves. All of them. But were all of them capable of leading the revolutionary armies through years of combat and of evasion of combat to the point where they were finally able to gain a victory over the British? Were all these other Virginia aristocrats capable of being the one who was turned to by the American people when the Articles of Confederation weren't working out? We need to do something about this. Well, we're going to have a convention. Who will chair it? Washington. Washington, the one person everyone could agree on as a person of exemplary character and fairness. And when that Constitution was written and ratified. Okay, it says here we're supposed to have a president. Who do we turn to? Who will this first president be? You think Washington put himself forward for that? I think Washington was like Donald Trump or Barack Obama or somebody else who comes out and comes down an escalator and runs for president. No. In Washington's view, such behavior would have been absolutely tasteless and vulgar. He did no such thing. How did Washington get to be president of the United States? It was because his countrymen, who knew him from long association and respected him, because they came to him and implored him to serve as America's first president. This was a man who was so loved by his fellow countrymen that they made up stories about him. Stories about his honesty. I cannot tell a lie, said Washington to his father. Who chopped down that cherry tree? Father, it was I who chopped down the cherry tree. Is that story true? I doubt it. I really do. But this is the type of story that was made up about Washington to tell to young people in order to impress upon them not only the virtue of honesty, but also the exemplary character of George Washington. On the view of a literalist, our previous caller might say, well, that's propaganda. Yeah, it is. All you have to do with Washington, you don't have to come up with the apocryphal stories about how he threw a silver dollar across the Potomac and all that stuff. You don't need to use that. With Washington, you can stick to the actual historical record and still have an exemplary human being of tremendous character and accomplishment, so respected by his fellows, his contemporaries, that they turned to him for leadership time and again. First in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. No lie. That's not propaganda. That's real. You won't find that in Zinn's textbook. No. No, all you'll find is, or the first thing you'll find, the most important thing you'll find, Washington was a slaveholder, and also Washington being depicted as a person who was intent on shaping the new nation in such a way as to guarantee and permanentize the prerogatives of he and his fellow aristocrats, when such was far from Washington's idea. This is the true poison of Zinn's history. Evan talked about history being a whitewash, and I said no, Zinn's history is a blackwash. A whitewash is designed to make everything look good, nice and clean and fresh. A blackwash is designed to besmirch everything and make it look vile. I use the term advisedly and on purpose. And again, I say to you, if you find that your child is in a school where Howard Zinn's text is used to teach American history, do something. Do something. Wilfred McClay, that's the name of the guy. There is you might been probably sitting there and thinking, isn't there an anti-Zinn? Some way to combat this? Yes, there is. And the man's name is Wilfred McClay. Let me very quickly see. Wilfred McClay is a professor of history who sought to write a textbook that would be, I guess, what can we see, a counterpoint? It's called Land of Hope. And as I look, I just typed in Wilfred McClay, and up comes Land of Hope, and there's all kinds of copies available at various prices, some more expensive than others. obviously, if you're going to buy one, buy the least expensive. Save your money. But if you have a child in school, get a hold of a copy of Wilfred McClay's book, Land of Hope, and have it available as a counterpoint to the propaganda, and it will be propaganda, that they are exposed to in public school or even in many private schools. The left has reached far beyond merely the public schools where they and their teachers' unions are all powerful. And having been in that milieu, I can tell you, they brook no opposition. It's one of the main reasons that I wound up making a career elsewhere. They made it too hot for me. I'm a First Amendment kind of guy, and they're not. So, yeah, Wilfred McClay is the author's name. The name of the book is Land of Hope. This is the antidote to Howard Zinn. But I can tell you this, for every school that has heard of or employed McClay's textbook, there are 100 or 1,000 where Zinn's malignancy is present. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, next story. Let's move on to something that's been developing over the weekend. On Saturday, we got this headline: Putin will halt war if he gets eastern Ukraine, he tells U.S. So Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump were supposed to get together, and the headline here was that Mr. Putin's terms were, well, I get to keep, a significant portion of Ukrainian territory, just as, back in 2014 I took Crimea and decided to keep it. Well, today, Ukraine and Europe have countered this, and I am going to present you with a model that I think is instructive here. The model is the Czechoslovakia crisis of 1938. Czechoslovakia was a nation that bounded Germany. This is Adolf Hitler's National Socialist paradise. So, along the borderline, along the Czech-German border, there was an area of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland, and it was populated by a lot of ethnic Germans. And Adolf Hitler made the point, well, these Germans are being persecuted and mistreated by the evil Czechs. We need to protect them. They need to be placed under the protection of the German Reich, and therefore Germany needs to act. Well, the Czech president, trying to remember, Beneš, I believe was the name, Edward Beneš, needless to say, he was not thrilled about the idea of having his country invaded, so he turned to his allies. He had made arrangements. Czechoslovakia had treaties of mutual assistance with great powers, Britain and France. And so what happened? Well, a conference was held at Munich at which the Czechs were not present. Who was present? Adolf Hitler, and the other primary actor was Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, along with French President Daladier, but Chamberlain was the primary spokesman for the opponents of Adolf Hitler. Chamberlain went to Munich with one overwhelming desire, one overarching goal. Chamberlain wanted peace. Chamberlain wanted to avoid war. Chamberlain wanted nobody dying. They might say, well, Charles, how can you condemn that? I'm not condemning it. A person who values peace, hey, peace is a wonderful thing. Peace is something that Mr. Trump is very much interested in today. So keep this in mind as a part of the parallel. So what does Chamberlain do? Chamberlain concludes a deal with Adolf Hitler for peace What does he offer? He essentially signs away Czechoslovakia's freedom and independence. The agreement Chamberlain makes in Munich buys peace with Czechoslovakian territory and Czechoslovakian freedom and liberty. But after all, that's not British, it's Czechoslovakian. So if you can get somebody else to pay for your peace, that's a good thing, isn't it? So Chamberlain does that. He goes back to Britain. He's very popular. He comes back waving a paper saying, I bring you peace in our time. And he's applauded. They give him a huge dose of clap. Well, not that much later, Adolf Hitler decides to tear up that agreement and simply invade, conquer, and occupy all of Czechoslovakia. So why do I bother retelling this history? Well, today we have Vladimir Putin, Freudian slip, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump meeting in Alaska. Who's not invited? President Zelensky of Ukraine is not invited. And essentially, Mr. Trump is, and has made no secret of the fact that he is very interested in peace. He wants to end conflicts where they exist. He wants people not to be dying and being shot and bombed, etc. And for this he is praised, and justifiably so. Who wants these awful things? So what will happen next? Will Mr. Trump do what Mr. Chamberlain did? Will he essentially trade Ukraine to Putin for a promise from Putin for peace? I hope not. I hope Mr. Trump is sufficiently schooled in the realities of history and in the reality of who Vladimir Putin is and how he thinks and how he operates, that he will not succumb to the temptation to believe that he can somehow win peace with a man who is not interested in peace. Just yesterday, I'm listening to a statement by President Trump, and he's saying, Mr. Putin, he wants peace. Well, no, he doesn't, and that's an objective fact. So why would Mr. Trump say he does? Well, Donald Trump many times has said things that simply did not stand up to objective reality. Sometimes he's just bloviating, but sometimes he is attempting to reshape arguments, to recast reality. Does Mr. Trump believe that by describing Putin as a man of peace, that he can cause Putin to become a man of peace? If so, President Trump is deluding himself, and that's dangerous. That's dangerous. Is President Trump trying to convince himself that betraying the West in Ukraine and allowing Putin to seize by force of arms and then seize more after that by force of arms? The question, of course, if Mr. Trump surrenders a significant portion of Ukraine to Putin, how long before Mr. Putin is once again at war, searching for the rest of it? Because Putin does not want and will not tolerate an independent Ukraine. His idea is Ukraine is a part of the Russian Empire. It is a state that has been under Russian subjugation most of the past several centuries, which is true. So that's the status quo. Does that make that what we ought to all hope for? I don't believe so. I don't believe so. But all I am is just a radio commentator. Mr. Trump is President of the United States. He actually has something real to say about this. And he's not alone. President Zelensky of Ukraine stands shoulder to shoulder with him. So do our NATO allies. In terms of strength and leverage, Mr. Trump and the West are in a very strong position vis-a-vis Russia and Putin. Now, that's a good thing. That wasn't really the case back in 1938. That's something different from that Hitler-Chamberlain comparison I made up. Adolf Hitler at that point was armed to the teeth. The British were attempting to play catch-up, but they were nowhere near ready for a war. Adolf Hitler was. Today, between us, the United States and NATO muster far more impressive forces than Vladimir Putin can field. And Mr. Putin knows it. So why not use our strength? By indulging in a larger war? No, I don't think so. Mr. Trump has shown us another way. He has indulged in warfare through trade, through economic actions, through diplomacy and sanctions. These can be applied far more effectively against Russia than they have so far been. I would suggest this is the way to go. Mr. Trump can have his cake and eat it too. The actions I'm proposing here and urging are not actions of war. No armies march, no bombs fall, no people die. Rather, instead, economic blows are struck. Mr. Putin's cash flow is impeded. His ability to continue to wage war is dealt a serious blow. Does this show instant results? No. If you're looking for instant gratification, line forms to the left. No, you have to play a longer game. I believe President Trump is perfectly capable of doing that. He has lived and prospered over a long career at a time when sometimes the smartest thing you can do is just wait until whoever it is you are negotiating with comes to the conclusions that you wish him to reach, and winds up saying to you, well, maybe I can see things a little more your way. I'm sure Mr. Trump has won many negotiations over the years with just such tactics. This is once again a time for those. So I'm hoping that Mr. Trump is not so desirous of peace at any price that he would throw away the leverage he has and essentially buy that peace with the territory and lives of another nation and another people. That's what Neville Chamberlain attempted to do, and it rather rapidly bit him in the back end. I would suggest that the long-term results for Mr. Trump will be no more salubrious. Something to think about. Donald Trump is an old man. Hell, he's older than I am. That qualifies him right then and there. He's also serving his second and therefore final term as President of the United States. The clock is running on Mr. Trump. And again, this is not something he's unaware of. I have never begun any of my presentations by supposing that Donald Trump is a dummy. Obviously, he is not. If he is attempting to accomplish a successful negotiation with Vladimir Putin, this is going to be one of the toughest that he ever faced. Years ago, a lifetime ago, we had a president, our best and most successful post-war president, Ronald Reagan, who managed to successfully end a Cold War in victory for the United States. He faced an adversary in Mikhail Gorbachev, who was more tractable than Vladimir Putin, someone easier to deal with. It is worth mentioning that in the years previous to Gorbachev coming to power in the Soviet Union, there had been 3 Soviet leaders. Mr. Brezhnev, who had been in office for a long time, presently died. Then Mr. Andropov, who held the position for a number of months and died. Then Mr. Chernenko, who held the position a few months and presently died. Reagan made a joke out of this when he was asked, why have you not met with any of your Soviet counterparts? He says, well, they keep dying on me. Ha, 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 funny, funny, funny. The real answer was more complicated and less amusing. When Reagan was first elected, he wrote a letter to Leonid Brezhnev, the general secretary at that time, a personal letter in which he suggested, oh, hey, there are places where we might be able to make some progress. Let's sit down and talk. It was an honest and sincere effort to set a new tone with the new administration. In reply, he received a communication full of boilerplate Soviet talking points that led Reagan to believe that Brezhnev might not have even seen his letter, but that the reply was written by a bunch of party apparatchiks who were absolutely uninterested in any kind of new dialogue with the President of the United States. And thus it remained until Gorbachev came along. Putin seems to me to be more of the Andropov, Chernenko type than of the Gorbachev type. And that's unfortunate for President Trump and for the West. In order to push Mr. Putin in the direction of being a peacemaker, you're going to have to push him in it's kind of like asking him to perform an unnatural act. It just isn't part of his upbringing or makeup. Donald Trump has a hard job to do. Let's hope he doesn't try to do it by buying things with another country's territory. It's 11 o'clock. I'll be back in 6 minutes.
He's a fascist. For decades, this has been a favorite smear of the left aimed at those on the right. Every Republican president, for that matter, virtually every Republican, since the 1970s has been called a fascist, now more than ever. This label is based on the idea that fascism is a phenomenon of the political right. The left says it is, and some self-styled white supremacists and neo-Nazis embrace the label. But are they correct? To answer this question, we have to ask what fascism really means. What is its underlying ideology? Where does it even come from? These are not easy questions to answer. We know the name of the philosopher of capitalism, Adam Smith. We know the name of the philosopher of Marxism, Karl Marx. But who's the philosopher of fascism? Yes, exactly. You don't know. Don't feel bad. Almost no one knows. This is not because he doesn't exist, but because historians, most of whom are on the political left, had to erase him from history in order to avoid confronting fascism's actual beliefs. So let me introduce him to you. His name is Giovanni Gentile. Born in 1875, he was one of the world's most influential philosophers in the first half of the 20th century. Gentile believed that there were two diametrically opposed types of democracy. One is liberal democracy, such as that of the United States, which Gentile dismisses as individualistic, too centered on liberty and personal rights, and therefore selfish. The other, the one Gentile recommends, is true democracy, in which individuals willingly subordinate themselves to the state. Like his philosophical mentor Karl Marx, Gentile wanted to create a community that resembles the family, a community where we are all in this together. It's easy to see the attraction of this idea. Indeed, it remains a common rhetorical theme of the left. For example, at the 1984 convention of the Democratic Party, the governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, likened America to an extended family, where, through the government, people all take care of each other. Nothing's changed. 30 years later, a slogan of the 2012 Democratic Party convention was, "The government is the only thing we all belong to." They might as well have been quoting Gentile. Now remember, Gentile was a man of the left. He was a committed socialist. For Gentile, fascism is a form of socialism, indeed, its most workable form. While the socialism of Marx mobilizes people on the basis of class, fascism mobilizes people by appealing to their national identity as well as their class. Fascists are socialists with a national identity. German fascists in the 1930s were called Nazis, basically a contraction of the term National Socialist. For Gentile, all private action should be oriented to serve society. There's no distinction between the private interest and the public interest. Correctly understood, the two are identical. And who is the administrative arm of society? It's none other than the state. Consequently, to submit to society is to submit to the state, not just in economic matters, but in all matters. Since everything is political, the state gets to tell everyone how to think and what to do. It was another Italian, Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy from 1922 to 1943, who turned words into action. In his Dottrina del Fascismo, one of the doctrinal statements of early fascism, Mussolini wrote, "All is in the state, and nothing human exists or has value outside the state." He was merely paraphrasing Gentile. The Italian philosopher is now lost in obscurity, but his philosophy could not be more relevant because it closely parallels that of the modern left. Gentile's work speaks directly to progressives who champion the centralized state. Here in America, the left has vastly expanded state control over the private sector, from healthcare to banking, from education to energy. This state-directed capitalism is precisely what German and Italian fascists implemented in the 1930s. Leftists can't acknowledge their man Gentile because that would undermine their attempt to bind conservatism to fascism. Conservatism wants small government so that individual liberty can flourish. The left, like Gentile, wants the opposite, to place the resources of the individual and industry in the service of a centralized state. To acknowledge Gentile is to acknowledge that fascism bears a deep kinship to the ideology of today's left. So they will keep Gentile where they've got him, dead, buried, and forgotten. But we should remember, or the ghost of fascism will continue to haunt us. I'm Dinesh D'Souza for Prager University.
Welcome back. Hour number 3 begins. I'm Charles Freedman. The time is 11:06. 831-265-5050 is the telephone number. 831-265-5050. Always a pleasure to hear from you on the program, to raise the issues you want to raise and ask the questions you want to ask, or make the statement you want to make. Remember, it's up to you to decide what we talk about. You've asked the question a number of times on the program, what in the world is wrong with some purported conservatives, specifically guys like Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon and these characters who call themselves conservatives, and yet the greatest conservative hero of the 20th century, Winston Churchill, is a man they revile. I remember having this conversation with my father. He thought the greatest man of the 20th century was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but I knew better. Churchill was the one who had stood so firm in the face of almost certain defeat. And as a matter of fact, unlike Roosevelt, Churchill had known political defeat. His disastrous election performance right after the end of the war and the coming to power of Clement Attlee is, well, essentially the reason why Great Britain today is in a state of almost terminal decline. You turn a country socialist, the next thing you know, it loses its soul. Well, let's look at this question. Why does the far right hate Winston Churchill? When I opened up my Sunday newspaper and I find a piece written by Andrew Roberts, who is an author of Churchill, Walking with Destiny. He's a member of the British House of Lords, and he has written on this topic. Hey, we've got a phone call. Let's grab that right this instant. Hello there. Welcome. Oh, whoops. Did we get the... What happened? Uh-oh. Looks like call dropped. Okay, well, if he decides to call back, we'll grab it. Okay, getting back to this topic of why the far right hates Churchill. So, what in the world would justify this? The accepted historical narrative of the past 80 years, that it was morally right for the United States and the United Kingdom to fight and destroy the Third Reich. That is what is now under assault. In November of 1940, Winston Churchill delivered a eulogy in Westminster Abbey at the funeral of Neville Chamberlain. Now, in the last hour, we were just talking about him. He was the guy who appeased Hitler. He was the guy who attempted to buy peace. What was the price he was willing to pay? Well, he was willing to pay Czechoslovakia. And it was a terrible piece of judgment for him. Why did he do it? I think that, and again, I say I think, I can't prove this, but Churchill, or rather Chamberlain, was fundamentally a very civilized man. And a very gentle man. He said he wanted peace because he really did. He wasn't being disingenuous. And he essentially, well, I guess he did something that we all get told at the outset not to do. When you were a child, were you ever taught, don't judge others by yourself? Don't judge others by yourself. But the problem is we do, don't we? And we continue to do it all our lives, to a degree. And the reason for it is fairly straightforward. Of all the people in the world you know, who do you know best? Of all the people in the world you know, whose secrets are you most familiar with? Whose thought processes are you most familiar with? Well, the obvious answer is yourself, of course. And since you know yourself better than any other human being, then when you deal with other human beings, you think, oh, well, I'm a human being, so is this fellow here. We've got to have a lot in common. If this is how I think, maybe this is how he thinks too. Sometimes there's something in that, often enough to where we keep doing it. But when Neville Chamberlain confronted Adolf Hitler and thought of him as another man interested in peace, just as today Donald Trump, this is what worries me, he describes Vladimir Putin as a man interested in peace. I hope that he's not being sincere when he says that, because it isn't true. And to the extent that Mr. Trump treats with Vladimir Putin as if he is a man of peace, Mr. Trump will be a 21st century version of Neville Chamberlain. This is what Trump doesn't want to do. And given Trump's age, I mean, obviously, he's familiar with these things. There's no way that he doesn't know who Chamberlain was and what he did. As part of that generation, when I was a boy, this was something we learned. So what did Churchill say at the funeral of Chamberlain, his predecessor as Prime Minister? Churchill spoke poetically about how historical judgments are reached. History, he said, with its flickering lamp, stumbles along the trails of the past, trying to reconstruct its themes, to revive its echoes and kindle with pale gleams the passion of former days. 60 years after his own death, Churchill's reputation is now at the forefront of the culture wars, something he himself would have relished, having put himself on the front line of 5 real wars on 4 continents before he was 42 years old. Churchill has long been hated by the left, blamed for opposing socialism and communism, breaking Britain's general strike of 1926, supporting the British Empire, and so on. Yet lately a new and virulent strain of Churchill hatred has broken out on the ultra-right, on both sides of the Atlantic, where he is blamed for a quite different set of supposed crimes. The American podcaster Darryl Cooper, this guy, there's a picture of him here, he looks like Poindexter. He's never written a history book, let alone one about World War II. But Tucker Carlson calls him America's most honest historian. He has claimed that it was Churchill's fault that the war escalated from the limited one that Adolf Hitler apparently wanted when he invaded Poland in September of 1939. According to Cooper, Churchill was the chief villain of the war, rather than any of the more obvious suspects. There are a number of problems with this theory, not least chronological. I remember, once again, I keep going back to my childhood today. One of the things we learned to draw, what year was it that we first did this? What I'm talking about is the timeline. You all know what a timeline is, don't you? You draw this line. Okay, here's the year 1945. And this is before 1945, and this is after 1945, 46, 47, 48, etc. And this timeline is a convenient device for arranging events in the order in which they occurred. We all understand the idea of causality. One thing happens and that causes another. But if one thing happened before another, then the thing that happened before another cannot have been caused by that other. I mean, if I do something right now, that could be caused by something I did a few minutes ago, or something I did yesterday. But what I do now can't be caused by something I'm going to do tomorrow. That turns causality on its head. And that's what Poindexter Cooper does here. Churchill did not even enter the British government until 2 days after the German invasion of Poland. Even then, he was not in control of British decision-making. He was taken back in as First Lord of the Admiralty. Essentially, in the United States cabinet, that would be Secretary of the Navy. And in those days, we did have a separate department heads for Army and Navy. Today, we have a Department of Defense that entails all of them. So Churchill was not in control of British decision-making. He did not become prime minister until after Hitler had unleashed his blitzkrieg in Western Europe, May 1940, the better part of a year after the invasion of Poland. Nonetheless, tens of millions of people have downloaded Cooper's ahistorical tripe, and the British neo-Nazi historian David Irving tweeted, "Glad we are in the mainstream narrative, but it would be nice to get a credit," which got over 250,000 views and over 5,000 likes. Joe Rogan, the world's most popular podcaster, has similarly opened the door to extreme revisionism, saying that Daryl Cooper has some of the most nuanced, balanced, and charitable views on all the figures of history, which is only true if he's talking about the Nazis. Am I saying here Joe Rogan's a Nazi? Hell no. Under no circumstances. What I'm saying is he's regarding himself as a person who can be hoodwinked. And when you're in his position, getting the reputation for being hoodwinked is not a good thing. Cooper's remarks on the Tucker Carlson show led the Holocaust-denying podcaster Jake Shields to conduct a poll on X asking who was the biggest villain of World War II. Among his almost 136,000 responses, 40% gave that distinction to Churchill. Stalin, 26%, Hitler, 25%. Shields' post was viewed by some 855,000 people. It led to a spate of online Churchill hatred, with comments such as, "The good guys lost World War II." Whoa, so the good guys were the Germans and the Japanese? The National Socialists and the militarists. Churchill wanted a war. Churchill was pure evil, and so on endlessly. I submit to you that this is emblematic of what we were talking about in the last hour. This is not merely a distortion of history. This is a reversal. When Churchill and the Allies are depicted as the bad guys, the black hats in World War II, you have to start wondering just exactly what other beliefs are people capable of subscribing to. I must admit at this point, as I share this with you, it takes my breath away that any person of normal intelligence could actually embrace these doctrines. This is utter nonsense. Meanwhile, in Britain, many representatives of the right-wing populist Reform Party have demonized Churchill. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that. The leader of the Reform Party, of course, is Nigel Farage, and he has always, whenever I've heard him mention Churchill, he's done so with respect. Ian Gribben, a general election candidate, posted on an unheard website that Britain would be in a far better state today had we taken up Hitler on his offer of neutrality. But no, Britain's warped mindset values weird notions of international morality rather than looking after its own people. In Britain specifically, we need to exorcise the cult of Churchill and recognize that both policy and military strategy he was abysmal. Okay, so his argument here is that the cost paid by Britain to win the war was wasted money. That rather instead, Churchill would have done better to come to an arrangement with Adolf Hitler. And indeed, Hitler was interested in such an arrangement. The problem with it was, and Churchill saw this clearly, that in any such arrangement with Adolf Hitler, Great Britain would obviously no longer be Great Britain, would be subject at any moment to unilateral abrogation. And Hitler in the past had given his word many times. I have no more territorial ambitions in Europe. After he signed the Munich Pact, he told Chamberlain to his face, this is it, I don't want anything more. After the Anschluss, I don't want any more. After the absorption of the rest of Czechoslovakia, Bohemia, Moravia, no, that's it. I have no further territorial ambitions in Europe. That was the phrase. I have no further territorial ambitions in Europe until a few months go by and then something else is on the chopping block. So Mr. Gribben evidently feels that Hitler was someone whose word was inviolate and who, once he gave his name to an agreement, you could take that to the bank. That's what Neville Chamberlain thought. He brought back a signed piece of paper and thought he'd accomplished something. And by the standards of conventional diplomacy and normal international relations, he had accomplished something. I can only imagine, Chamberlain died not long after that. How much of that was due to his broken heart? How much of it was due to having his trust and his civilization humiliated by someone who simply didn't care what he signed? Oh, that was yesterday. Reform's official spokesman doubled down on these comments, speaking to, ironically enough, the Jewish Chronicle, saying they were written with an eye toward inconvenient perspectives. So why is this right-wing targeting of Churchill going on? In the simplest terms, it is because Churchill's practical aims and principles as a leader of the West were directly opposed to the new strain of isolationism in America and Britain. Today's revisionists project their views about Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Iran backward through history and denounce the leading global interventionists of yesteryear. They blame Churchill, along with Franklin Roosevelt, for escalating the conflict with Hitler and thus associate him with any effort to confront today's aggressive tyrants. It's a sign of the lost trust in established institutions on both sides of the Atlantic that the established historical narrative of the past 80 years that it was morally right for the United States and Great Britain to fight and destroy the Third Reich. This is now under assault. This new revisionism is possible only because the greatest generation is dying out. They pretty much have died out. The generation of my parents, very few representatives of that left. Their sacrifice is becoming a debatable part of history rather than a lived reality. It's an unfortunate necessity to engage with these benighted and often hateful revisionists, as their failure to win the endorsement of any of the hundreds of serious historians of World War II suggests. Their arguments, such as they are, cannot survive contact with the reality of the historical record. There is an objective truth here. There is an objective truth here. This is, I didn't realize we were going to be discussing it today, but the fact that we're talking about this an hour after discussing the vicious mendacity of anti-historians like Howard Zinn. This is the impact. I was talking about cause and effect. Zinn wrote his book X number of years ago. Now, today, certain numbers of people who grew up reading his garbage and internalizing just how awful their country is are only too willing to lower it to the level of National Socialism and Adolf Hitler. One of the greatest movies of the 20th century was The Best Years of Our Lives. It was a movie that Sam Goldwyn produced right after the end of the war in order to help Americans share the thought of what we've just been through, what it's like now that it's over, the conflicts, the problems. There's a scene in a soda fountain where a young veteran who's been disabled is having an ice cream soda, and a guy next to him starts saying, "Hey, I thank you for your sacrifice, soldier. I'm just so sorry that you were fighting on the wrong side." What are you talking about? Read the facts. You'll know. No, they got us into this war. We were fighting the wrong people. We should have been on the other side. Well, what this guy gets for his trouble is a solid clip to the jaw, which was, de rigueur in 1946. And frankly, the urge to react in that fashion to people who spout this nonsense is difficult for me to resist. But I'm an old guy now, and I've never been really a belligerent type. I'm not a war veteran. I'm a veteran. Never went to war. That makes a whole different type of veteran, I would think. But now it's a sign of the lost trust in established institutions that the accepted historical narrative that it was morally right for us to fight and destroy the Third Reich is now under assault. It's a generational thing. It's a generational thing. And unfortunately, this younger generation, the Daryl Coopers and Tucker Carlsons, if I had children, they'd be this age. Or maybe my children might even be a little older. I've never had any kids. Made up my mind years ago. One of the first decisions I ever took, even when I was in high school, I'd made up my mind that I would never have any children. And I never seriously rethought that. I can only imagine, how would I feel today if I had kids and I found them spouting this type of nonsense? I'd want to drown them. It's an unfortunate necessity to engage with these benighted and often hateful revisionists. Their failure to win the endorsement of any serious historian suggests their arguments cannot survive contact with the reality of the historical record. As I was saying, there is an objective truth here. It's perfectly true that Churchill was instrumental in persuading the British War Cabinet not to make peace with Hitler. Absolutely true. The decision was taken no fewer than 9 discussions on 4 days between May 25th and May 28th, 1940. As they deliberated, a small armada of boats made their way to evacuate the British Expeditionary Force from the beaches of Dunkirk back to England. The reason I resent Churchill so much for it, Daryl Cooper says, is that he kept this war going when he had no way of winning. He had no way to go back and fight this war. All he had was bombers, just rank terrorism. More than that, once Hitler ripped up another treaty and invaded Russia in June of 1941, Churchill immediately made common cause with Stalin against Nazi Germany. Possibly the archetypal illustration of the old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Churchill had been and remained anti-communist. And when asked about this, he made one of his wittiest remarks. How can you, an anti-communist, how can you now enter into league with Stalin's Soviet Union? Churchill replied, if Adolf Hitler were to invade hell, I would find occasion to make a favorable reference to the devil in Commons. typically British statement, but yeah. If Adolf Hitler were to invade hell, I would befriend Satan. That's laying it on the line. Let's see what else we've got here. The reason I resent Churchill. There we are. It's worth considering what might have happened had Churchill not urged these fateful choices. The road not taken. If Britain had remained neutral in the West and refrained from bombing Germany, Hitler would have been able to concentrate his entire Luftwaffe against Russia. Instead, he had to hold 30% of it back to guard against Churchill's bombers. Neutrality in the face of Hitler would have meant that the 5,000 aircraft and 7,000 tanks and 51 million pairs of boots and the rest of the aid that Britain and America sent the USSR would not have materialized. Nor would the invasion of Normandy have taken place while the Russians and Germans were fighting in Belarus, which leads to the obvious, with either Hitler or Stalin controlling all of Europe, besides Paris and Minsk, all the world between Paris and Minsk, the world, including America, would have been in a vastly worse place than the one that Churchill and Roosevelt helped to fashion in 1945. In his peroration at Westminster Abbey, Churchill said, "The only guide to a man is his conscience. The only shield to his memory is the rectitude and sincerity of his actions. It's very imprudent to walk through life without this shield because we were so often mocked by the failure of our hopes and the upsetting of our calculations. But with this shield, however, the fates may play, we always march in the ranks of honor." Despite the best efforts of his revisionist detractors, Churchill marches there still. He stands watching over a world order that is now challenged by, among other things, a populist far right whose influence is spreading dangerously. So, what do we come away from this with? The title, Why the Far Right Hates Churchill. And it looks as if it is a matter of simple short-sighted selfishness. Churchill should have made common cause with Hitler. Churchill should have accepted Hitler's offer of an armistice, a truce. Again, the important thing to ask is, for how long? Because by that time, I mean, you could be forgiven, I think, for accepting Hitler's professions of peaceful intent when he first came to office. You might be looking at the way the first thing he does is start rebuilding his army and building the Luftwaffe. Why, if you are so interested in peace, are you purchasing all of this military hardware? What is that all about? Well, the first thing that happened was, of course, the reoccupation of the Sudetenland. The Saar. And this was, the crossing of the Rhine and reclaiming of the Rhineland. It was in violation of the Versailles Treaty. And Hitler understood that at that time, the Allies, Britain and France, had the military power to stop him. The German commanders had orders, hey, if you see anybody marching toward you, get the hell out of there. Turn tail and run. But Hitler was able to win that fight without firing a shot. And as such, his stature increased. Oh, hey, Hitler wins without war. A year later, the Anschluss. A threat of war, but certainly it never occurred. Instead, Germany added Austria to its Reich. A year later, the Sudetenland, the Munich crisis that we talked about earlier in this broadcast. Oh, we only want this part of Czechoslovakia, this part where we have these German-speaking people that we've got to protect. And that's the deal? That's the deal. 6 months later, the rest of Czechoslovakia gone. Oh, not gonna invade Poland, no way. A year later, Poland is invaded. And in the light of all of that, you have these idiots saying, well, you should have made a deal with Hitler. Why? If you have somebody who reneges on every single deal he makes, what in the name of common sense would lead you to gamble your national existence? Oh, well, this time he's not going to lie. This time he really means it. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Taking Hitler's word, how stupid do you have to be? How stupid do you have to be to say, yeah, I want to sign an agreement with Hitler? He's a decent man. He's an honest man. His word is good. And again, if you're going to be that foolish, if you're going to advocate things that incomprehensibly dumb, well, how can you argue with that? Normally, when you get into an argument with somebody, when you get into a discussion, you credit them with intelligence. It seems to me that those who are arguing that reaching an accommodation with Hitler was a good idea are demonstrating a lack of intelligence. Are you saying they're stupid? Yeah, I normally don't say that, but this time I have to, because it sure as hell looks like they are.
Hi, folks. Warren Knox here of Knox Roofing. I thought I'd share a few statistics with you. Do you know how long a frog can hold its breath? 4 minutes. Do you know how many nails the average roof requires? 7,000. What's the percentage of roofing companies that will be out of business after they've installed a roof? 80%. Here at Knox Roofing, we're still going strong, exceeding 15,000 homes now. Give us a call here at Knox Roofing at 461-0634. Thanks, folks.
I've got a question for you. Do you want a lower car payment just by making a phone call? You know, most people buy a car and they pay whatever the car dealer says their interest rate is, and they forget about it and make payments. But did you know there is a secret in your contract that allows another company to refinance any car payment to try and lower it? It's true. There is indeed a company out there that knows the ins and, more importantly, the outs on car loans, and they know how to lower your current car payments. It's easy and fast, and you could have a lower car payment next month. Make this free call right now and find out if you could lower your existing car payment. Call the Car Savings Hotline right now. The call is free.
Call now. 800-471-4435. 800-471-4435. 800-471-4435. That's 800-471-4435.
Attention content producers. You can have access to a complete digital media production facility at Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on Soquel Avenue. Easily rent video and audio equipment, a studio with green screen, editing suite, and audio booth, all at can't say no rates. Schedule a tour to see for yourself at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
Okay, we have got ourselves a phone call to open this final 20 minutes of the program, and I couldn't be more pleased. Mike is on the line, and here he is. Hello, sir. Thank you for calling.
Good morning, Mr. Freedman. This is Mike from Aptos.
Yes.
Yeah, listening to you, I find it very interesting, you know, what we're seeing in recent months, years with this historical revisionism. We're seeing that point where the extreme left and the extreme right come together. And I think there's two primary ways this is happening. One, as you've been talking, this historical revisionism about how to deal with Nazi Germany and Churchill. And also, you know, not totally unrelated, I think we're also seeing that with Hamas and Israel. And some of the issues happen to cross over, which I think is a basic tenet amongst the right and amongst Islamists, which is, the evil Jew. And then I think you have, the useful idiots that exist on the left that are helping to encourage this. I think there's plenty of reasons to criticize how the Allies handled Germany after World War I. And I'm a firm believer that the Treaty of Versailles is directly responsible for the rise of the Nazi Party in World War II. However, all of that was well before Churchill. And I would argue, as many people do, had Germany been given more lenient surrender terms, and if Bolshevism, they had done more to stop it, you would have no Nazi Party. And, anybody who thinks that, if we had just appeased Germany, everything in Europe would be hunky-dory and there would be no communism, has no idea of what was going on in Germany. I've read many, many books on the Third Reich, and the anti-Semitism, anti-Catholics were going on with the Nazi Party well into the 20s. And there is no way, if we had just appeased them, that some group wouldn't have been targeted. And, that is just the way it was. And again, I think you called it, these people are either incredibly ignorant or just, being intentionally naive. Your thoughts?
I'm grateful for your call and for the analysis and the exposition. Very good. One thing that neither of us have mentioned yet, these people seem to be saying, well, Churchill was wrong not to have treated with Hitler. Well, let's look at somebody who did. In September of 1939, Molotov and von Ribbentrop, the Soviet and Nazi foreign ministers, got together and drafted and signed the Nazi-Soviet Pact, called the Pact of Steel. This was what happened here was Joseph Stalin essentially, and this speaks directly to your argument, Joseph Stalin looked at the feckless responses of the Western democracies, Britain and France, to Adolf Hitler. And in spite of the fact that Adolf Hitler was continually screaming about how much he hated communism, after all, here he was a National Socialist, Stalin was a socialist, so they had at least something there in common. But also, Stalin figured, I'm not going to ally myself with these British and French. They're doing nothing. They're accomplishing nothing. I am going to sign peace with Hitler because it'll be better for my country. So Joseph Stalin actually took the advice of these people, did what they advocated. And, I asked the question, how long would that last? How long would it be before Stalin would, or rather Hitler would tear that up and come after you? Well, we have the answer to that. It was, let me see, almost 2 years later, 1939, 1940, 41. Yeah. June of 1941, when Hitler launched Barbarossa. And Stalin was shocked.
Correct.
He had counted on Hitler, to be, we signed a peace, and part of this deal was that the Soviet Union would be supplying a lot of raw materials to Germany. All of them have been supplied. We're doing business with them on an ongoing basis. Everything is just fine. And all of a sudden, I've got an 800-mile-long war front with the Germans. So we have the answer to what, a signed document with Adolf Hitler meant. And the idea that somebody would be advocating you sign a peace with Adolf Hitler, this, as I say, it's either monumental ignorance of Hitler and how he operated, or you're just plain dumb.
Oh, exactly. And just adding a little information to what you just said, there were actually German soldiers, as Germany was massing on the borders of the Soviet Union. There were leftist soldiers, communists that had been drafted, that went east and told the Russians the plans for invasion. And Stalin had many of these German soldiers imprisoned. So that is how much of a surprise it was. And again, I think with the right, with the far, far right, I think it's still rooted in complete anti-Semitism. And they're either being, ignorant to all the other groups that were affected by Germany. Some people seem to just think it was only the Jews that were targeted by the Nazis. There were many, many other groups. In fact, the highest per capita death during the war were Poles. Just because of their horrendous treatment by the German army. And like Belarus, a huge percentage of Belarusians were killed that were not Jews necessarily. And again, I think it's just all boils down to anti-Semitism.
With the Poles, again, the Katyn Forest massacre comes to mind, which of course was perpetrated by the Soviets and blamed on the Germans.
Yes.
And this was a major propaganda coup. The Soviets exterminated thousands of Polish officers in a mass murder, and then said, "Oh, look what the terrible Germans! Look what they did." And of course, the victims there were Poles. I don't know. I know they were Polish military officers. How many of them were Jewish, I do not know. But the Poles, Jew and Gentile alike, were victimized ruthlessly by both sides.
Right. Well, there's, and this is where the left shows its ignorance too. I firmly believe, had the Nazis not invaded, had Germany not invaded the Soviet Union, eventually Stalin would have invaded the West. And living under the Soviets was no better than getting occupied and conquered by the Germans. When you look at the millions of Ukrainians that died under Stalin, and, it would just be a different targeting, whereas, the Germans kind of targeted people on racial ethnic lines. The Soviets would have easily targeted just as many people on ideological lines.
Thank
so
you.
Either way, a lot of people were going to die.
Thank you very much. I used to joke all the time, what was the difference between Hitler and Stalin? And the answer, of course, Hitler had a small mustache, Stalin had a large mustache. But there's actually one more difference. Both Hitler and Stalin were socialists and fascists with a particular view of society. Hitler's was race-based. Hitler's was entirely, there's this hierarchy of the races, and at the top, of course, is the Aryan, blue-eyed, blonde-haired Superman. Whenever I go somewhere, I see a little blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid, I say, der Führer will be so pleased. And people look at me like, what the hell are you talking about? But this was his idea. This was the top of the racial pyramid. And these were the supermen. These are Ubermensch. Everybody else exists to serve them and to work for them and to do their bidding and to, till their fields and man their factories. The Aryan, German, Nordic type, this is the ultimate of human accomplishment, the ultimate human evolution. So Hitler regards the Slavs of Eastern Europe and other races, Negro people, Oriental people. How in the hell? He had to work out some weirdness to make the Japanese honorary Aryans. I am not kidding you.
Yes.
And literally, this was part of how he was able to sign an alliance with Japan, because he was able to work out some theory by which the Japanese were Oriental Aryans or something like that. I don't know. Obviously, this whole thing is just a bunch of nonsense, race-based nonsense. But this was Hitler's view.
Right. Well.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. I know at the core that was their belief, but.
But what I was going to say I was going to contrast that with Stalin. Now, Stalin had a similar hierarchical view, except that him being a student of Marx and like that, his was based on a socioeconomic class and also on nationality. not race.
Yes.
And so he would, the Ukrainians were basically racially they're identical to Russians. They're Slavic peoples, but they're Ukrainians. They're national Ukrainians. Therefore, they are enemies, and we persecute them, and we send them to Gulag, and we this and that. The point that you made about Stalin's atrocities being no less vile than Hitler's atrocities, that's absolutely true. And as a matter of fact, if you come down to the question, who was the greatest mass murderers in history? Well, of course, the top name is Mao Zedong. But Joseph Stalin actually was responsible for more political murder than Adolf Hitler. Hitler places number 3 in that hierarchy. So Stalin and Hitler are both utter monsters. They simply have a different theory of analysis by which this terror is applied.
Absolutely. And just kind of adding on to what you were saying about Stalin, much of Stalin's, which groups he persecuted, yes, it was based on national boundaries. And it also had nothing to do with an individual's, their individual ideology. So many of the groups that he persecuted after the revolution were the groups that supported the royalists, the czarists, the White Russians. I recently read a book. It's called Panzer Commander, and it's about Hans Luck. He was one of Rommel's adjutants, and the British eventually called him the gentleman Nazi because he worked with the British after the war to help with tactics regarding the Normandy campaign and things like that. And from everything I've read about him, he actually fought very ethically. He fought in the Western Front almost the entire war. In the last few months of the war, he was sent to the East, his bad luck, and he was captured by the Russians at the end of the war, and he was imprisoned. One of the things I found very interesting in his biography, his autobiography, was when he was in a prison camp in Georgia. And it was at a point after the war where they were going out and doing work details. He talked about how kind the Georgian population was to the German soldiers because many of their older people remembered the Germans supporting them in the revolution, in fighting the Bolsheviks.
Right.
So, and that was a class of people that were treated horribly, even though Stalin was a Georgian himself.
That's right. It's interesting. Stalin's real name, of course, was Joseph Dugashvili, a very Georgian name. Adolf Hitler's real name was Schicklgruber. It has always been of interest to me. Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, his real name was Ulyanov. So it strikes me as fitting that if you're going to go around behaving the way these guys did, you don't use your right name.
Well, I'd like to leave on one other thing. It's sort of off topic, not totally, but I know with the left, one of their the way they like to bash Churchill is because he was a colonialist. Also, why they like to bash Israel, colonialism. I think this the way the West has become to apologize for colonialism is absolutely ridiculous. And what I would like just to see somebody think about, if Britain didn't colonize all these different areas, and there's a lot of bad that goes with any colonialism, but that is the way of man. Everybody colonializes. The Ottoman Empire colonialized. The Romans, that is what shaped the world. Somebody conquers and somebody is being conquered. That's just the way it is. So if Britain didn't do it, do people really think we would have just had this, great kind of like rainbow peaceful existence over the planet? And what would happen to all the inventions, all the advancements that came out of colonialism? I would just like somebody on the left to answer that for me one of these days.
And my favorite way of making that point is you take California. Gavin Newsom is proud of going around today saying California is the world's 4th or 5th or whatever largest economy. If California had never been essentially taken over by descendants of Europeans, Americans, etc., what would California be today? Would we have Disneyland, Griffith Park Observatory, either of the Bay Bridges, any of that? No. Instead, we'd have the Ohlone Indians running in the forests and essentially eating the bark off the trees. So, yeah, don't. Where would their universities and symphony halls and observatories be? There wouldn't be any.
What would happen would be the Ohlone Indians would eventually be conquered by somebody else, possibly another Native American tribe, who had made an advancement or saw that they were somehow technologically superior. That happened with Native American tribes all over the continent.
That's certainly
South
true.
America and Central America.
That's true. So that answers the question you posed of what makes people think that absent the Europeans, everything would have been a utopia. No, as a matter of fact, it would have been people getting hit over the head with whatever was available at the time, and you'd have had the same man's inhumanity to man, just on a less industrial scale.
Exactly. It was a pleasure talking to you, Mr. Freedman.
And you too. It's a pleasure to find out there's somebody else who's just as appalled as at this anti-Churchill screed as I am. I used to occasionally listen to some of Tucker Carlson's presentations, and he was basically a conservative. Right now, I wouldn't watch this man walk across the street. He has completely disqualified himself in my eyes.
Oh, I feel the same way, and I actually think that trend is quite disconcerting.
And it is a trend. That's what's even worse. That's what Mr. Roberts here points out. A populist far right whose influence is spreading dangerously. The future world is going to be made by the readers of Howard Zinn. If that isn't enough to make you sick to your stomach, I don't know what is.
Hairs are up on the back of my neck right now.
Well, thank you for the call, sir, and I always look forward to your visit. I think we just lost that. I heard the noise that's made when my phone system decides to let go. But that's okay, because we are now in the middle of the very last minute of today's program. Therefore, we're done. Thank you, everybody, for listening. It is with tremendous trepidation that I ask you to please tune in again tomorrow. Hope you do. Once again, the telephone number will be 831-265-5050, and we'll be happy to hear from you. Stay tuned now to Santa Cruz Voice. Coming up next will be the Noon Balloon, followed by more great programming that will amuse, interest, entertain, astonish, enrage you. Okay, enough said. It's noon. Have a great day. See you tomorrow at 9:06. $180.